I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving off my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. So what do you get when you combine a lot of mechs from a bunch of other minor series into one game? Well, you got the original generation sub-series of the Super Robot Wars series. It's really a really ingenious idea. Basically get all the original characters that you put in these crossover games into one game that you solely own and gain all the profits. It's really a cool idea. Allows for a lot of more interesting ideas since, well, crossover games have the problem of not allowing for much interesting character dynamics. Well, I mean, as in, like, character dynamics of changing and whatnot, rather than just the dynamics of characters bouncing off one another. Anyway, this is a game I really like. But, god damn it, it's sometimes really hard to.
Super Robot Wars as a series is hard enough to talk about to other fans, let alone to anyone who doesn't actually know anything about the franchise. The barrier to entry is still high, like ridiculously high. A good example of this barrier to entry is the game Moon Dwellers, which, if you don't know, was so steeped in its own continuity that if you didn't play the OG games and the Masho Kaishin games, you would be entirely lost. Yeah, that many games.
For that game, I just legit tell people, if you want to play Moon Dwellers, that's fine, just note that you're playing it purely for gameplay. And the graphics. And the music. And the author bites. Okay, everything but the story. Since again, it's lost in translation since none of the other games have been translated, except today's game, Original Generations, which is a translation of 1 and 2. I'm not doing 2 because this would just make the review longer, and I have already spent more time on this game than I have any right to.
But luckily we got Original Generations, which is actually a more accurate version of what happens in Original Generations 1 and 2. Which is annoying to say since continuity of the games have been kind of changing up every so often, and it just gets hard to follow at times. I mean, again, we only got like 3 of those games outside of Japan. The rest are all fans translated, and hell, some of those don't even bother to translate the entire story, for some bizarre reason. I mean, I really don't get it. Like, seriously, the series has predicated itself on the cool, fun, kind of Easter egg, plus also crossover with other series, which, that's the entire fun of the entire series. And if you feel like I'm being mean to these games, to be fair, I think all the games in the franchise are good, including this one. I'm annoyed at only things that, like, this series could have done to improve itself, but overall, they're pretty damn good regardless. I'm just kinda still more annoyed we ever got this game officially.
But enough preamble, let's really get into Super Robot Wars, Original Generations 1, The Vine Wars.
The game begins with a choice with who we want to play as. And I mean to mention this since it really annoys me a lot. Okay, the character select is important since not only do we get to see things from their perspective, but somehow, and I don't particularly know why, only Ryusei and the first part of Kyosuke's route are canon. I'm sorry, what?
May I ask, why the hell did you have to make a whole section of a game where it doesn't fucking matter? That's messed up. That just tells players that the route we just played and the character we just cared about, fucking worthless. Get the fuck out of here. That's the sort of feeling you get. And the sad part is, I truly enjoyed Kyosuke's route a lot. And it's not to say that Ryusei's route is bad. I enjoyed both immensely. It's just the game does that for some reason that I really cannot fathom. It's also annoying when you also remember that, if you don't know, of course you don't know, I had to redo Kyosuke's route twice. Well, not fully, but parts of it. Because I lost data for some fights, meaning I had to redo them. And I lost some footage, which that's just fun. Anyway, it just would have been cool if we just played both sides of the same story, where they're both canon. and we get to choose who do we want to play as, and then switch over when we're done with that route. I don't know why that's not the case. It just seems better that way, if anything.
Anyway, the game begins with a very long intro that explains how this world got its mech. See, basically a long time ago, 3 meteors fell to Earth. While the first 2 caused destruction to DC and Moscow, the 3rd meteor, however, landed unnaturally safe, off in an area where it didn't cause much damage. But studying it allowed them to actually figure out that it didn't land normally. In fact, it landed too well. And because of this and the materials on it, they figure out a way to make mechs with these materials, called personal troopers, or shortened down to PTs. With the creation of these mechs, a council was made to handle all of them. And basically, they made them into more of a production, as the mechs of the series are also called Gespenst. The name sounds familiar. Wonder where I heard that before. Anyway, we're now asked to choose who we want. Both sides are interesting, though I prefer one over the other. I'll let you decide that. The first one being Ryusei is the pilot who's, after being attacked after losing a game tournament, which just makes it more odd since it's actually a secret recruitment for the new mech designs for something called the T-Link. Tragically, we do not link up with Mr. T and form the T-Force, because that would have been awesome, but whatever. We are also handled by this guy, who is totally not evil. Totally not evil. I mean, it's not help with him also being forced to do it or else be arrested, because that makes sense. It's your basic Gundam pilot plot. Basically, kid who has actual extraordinary skills piloting these mechs forced into during the war times. It's not handled bad at all, it's just generic, if anything. On the other side, there's a guy named Kyosuke, who's trying out a changing form mech that is defective on purpose, since the guy in charge really wants the people who made him owe him a favor, because he's a dick. And really, killing someone isn't really gonna hurt his conscience, because again, he's a dick. Even after it failed, he somehow survived because he has the devil's luck, and really, I would have to say he really does, because he survived a close-range explosion. I don't know how, just is. After healing and basically getting reassigned to another group, he basically joins up with a group called the ARX team, testing out new mechs for the fight against Arrogator. Oh yeah, and Ryusei joined up with the group that Evil Guy was from. Basically, it's the SRX team, just so we're clear, because I forgot about that in my script for some bizarre reason. My bad. And I also forgot, because again, this video took me way too long to actually finally finish. I forgot to talk about the Arrogator. The Arrogators are a sort of alien group that is attacking the Earth. Sometimes. They're not very clear on their goal till way later, but we'll talk about that goal when they actually become more important to the plot. They are basically trying to get enough people in mechs so that when the Arrogators do attack, they'll be prepared to actually handle them. Though they get sidelined for a bit since another force called the Divine Crusaders comes in and, you guessed it, tries to take over the world.
Of course!
Yeah, like I stated in my Super Robot Wars 2 video, which you should totally watch by the way, wink wink, I stated that that game and this game's plots are very similar. And in fact, while looking over Original Generation's plot as a whole, I noticed that it was very similar to the classic timeline. Or basically the original 4 Super Robot Wars games, to be clear. Which is not a bad thing, by the way. It's fine. Doing your own thing. I'm cool with that.
Yeah, Zoldyck comes out and says, yeah, I'm taking over the world so I can make sure that the world will be safe when the Arrogators come. But ironically also do terrible things, include terrible people in their group as well. Just like Zoldyck did originally. Yeah, he pretty much wins with being able to control most of everything, like really damn quickly, to the point that any counterplans would just generally spell death. I mean, the world's supply of PTs really does help, but it also helps when you have this guy on your side. And there's a reason why Shu Shirakawa is always a smug bastard. Plus, also being voiced by Takehito Kayasu is also good, and he also played the smuggest bastard ever, so that helps too. Though if Shu Shirakawa's here, that means another person's here too. He wants to stop him very much. That being Masaki Ando. And I need to mention the timeline thing again, because, oh boy, I mentioned it earlier, and let me tell you, we need to dive a little deeper. See, I mentioned that if you wanted to play Moon Dwellers, you need to play about 9 Super Royal Wars games, which is very annoying. The reason why that annoys me is, again, most of them haven't been even translated, and they are time sinks. Pretty much all the Super Royal Wars games take a long time to beat. Hell, I actively lost a lot of footage for this game, and I had to redo them all, which is more annoying when you find out that was only Kyosuke stuff. Yeah, and I did not even originally know that only Ryosuke's route mattered. Yeah, see why I'm a little more annoyed about the whole one route only canon? And actually speaking on this game, we need to mention Masho Kaishin. Particularly the DS and PSP version, which haven't been translated yet, for some reason. I hope one day. And I only mention those versions because the original game focused on the classic timeline rather than the current original timeline, which is confusing to say the least. Hell, they don't even properly explain the details of them all at all, and it's very confusing because if you don't know why they're here, it's going to be very confusing. Yeah, actually, Masaki and Shu are never properly explained in the game, which is shocking to say the least, since these games do actually try to explain everything they can. But for Masaki and Shu, not really. Though that's just a minor complaint, and with his help, and with everyone else we collected on the way, we defeat Bind himself, and if you're lucky, Shu as well. I'll explain in a bit, trust me. You finally defeat the DC, and ironically, this was his plan all along. It's pretty much a win-win situation. If he wins, well, he gets to handle the things his way. But if they win, well, they were better than him, and he was strong enough, and he already took over the world. If they beat him, they're pretty sure to beat the Arrogators as well. Also, while I'm here, why are they called Arrogators? Ain't like they most likely have a name, and just making up that name just sounds stupid when they're gonna just reveal their name anyway. Anyway, back to what I was going on. Now, you're probably all wondering, why did he take over? I mean, like, if he felt like this was going to be handled anyway, why handle it now?
Basically, the EOTC was going to just basically give the Earth to them. Yeah, they were assholes all along. Like, that was a hard fact to find. But in their sort of defense, they had a good point about not knowing the strength of the Arrogators and them being around long enough to know what our strength is, and plus, they just got out of a war they barely won. You can see their point of it. Not that much, but still. Also, this guy's design is just hilarious. I don't know why, but it just gets a chuckle out of me every time.
Yeah, and ironically, it's right after we defeat them, the Arrogators arrive for realsies this time with a moon.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
Indeed. And it comes right at Earth, and yeah, the Arrogators are becoming very more active. It's also not helped with the DC being full of the assholes left over who are trying to take over the world, for their own purposes this time. Also, the Arrogators take out the EOTC, because that's a fulfilling way to end a plot line. At this point, it's just mostly cleanup. And also, we find out that the obviously evil guy is actually evil. Oh my god. Anyway, let's actually pause for a moment and talk about the characters of the story, since I haven't really talked about them. Well, that's mostly because, well, there are a lot of characters in the game, like, I would say around 50 who are important to the plot. Yeah, I'm not even joking. I mean, it's also not helped with these very long cutscenes that can go on for quite a while. I also want to mention that I had the cutscenes on auto, not for my sake, but for your sake, so you can actually read what's going on. Because if I was actively just reading the cutscenes, it would just go like so quickly that you wouldn't even know what's going on. So let's talk about the cutscenes, or at least the text boxes. since they do include a moment dictionary. Basically, that's a dictionary that the game will give you for certain terms if they're used commonly or not very precise. It's quite useful for when you don't remember a term or something, which is very helpful since it will throw a lot of terms at you at once, so you gotta be aware of them. Though that's not to say they don't actually explain what these terms are. They actually do, unlike another game I know.
It just shows that you can have a complicated plot, but still be very understandable. Unlike another game I know. Also, just telling you now, we're gonna do a video about this one. Give it time. Give it time. It's a long project I've been trying to do while I try to figure out a good way to kill this game. Give it time.
But back onto the topic of the characters. I had to mention that Kyosuke's route, in my mind at least, is better because it doesn't waste time on characters who you could not give much of a crap about, like these two, who don't do anything and only feel around because more pilots for the mechs. I don't know. There's not a lot of good answers here. I mean, I haven't played the sequel and I don't know what they do in the sequel, but they don't do anything here, which is strange because they're near around a character called Latoon who I actually like, but I barely understood who she was because they didn't really explain much of her background at all. And I know that stuff will be in the sequel, but it's just odd is all I'm saying. Which is worse if you're playing on Kyosuke's route, where her backstory is barely explained at all, including these three, which is even more bizarre when I just said they didn't really have much. Which again annoys me because it forced me to play both sides when I think both sides should not have been even a thing. Though to be clear, they are the exemption, not the rule, as I really did love these characters, even if they're a bit tropey, but lovable. Like for example, Kyosuke's the usual stoic protag, but they don't just play it like, oh, he's very straightforward. Nah. The joke is that he's very straightforward. I know that sounds odd, but there's a difference between playing the joke of his straightforwardness than him being straightforward, being the joke in and of itself. You have Ryusei, who I have been ragging on a bit, but he's actually a genuinely nice guy. He's always there trying to help out, trying to figure out what's right, what's wrong with stuff, you know what I mean? I mean, he's really into mechs. I mean, like, to the point that the only thing he's ever cued in the series is this thing, and honestly, I don't know why they designed it like that. To the bizarre characters, like Excellin, who's so perverted that I must say she went to the Bayonetta schools of Indonesia. I'm not even joking at some level. And another bizarre character, Shadi, who's basically mostly focused on yoga. She's interesting at times when she's not doing that and focusing on the mechs, but it's mostly the yoga joke, which got old quickly. But then we get the awesome characters like Sunger Sonvo, the man who understands that a sword on a mech is glorious. I really actually got to love a lot of the characters on Kyosuke's route, since they are given time to shine, and I really love them all, even Katina. Except when she's a bitch. But then again, who isn't? I would say there is the problem of not a lot of development for them, but I still don't get why that's a complaint in any story. As long as they're interesting to watch, I don't mind. They don't need to change just to be interesting, you know? It sounds like a non-critique. That's not to say that Ryusei's route characters are bad, they're just a bit flooded who I don't care about. Like again, like Garnet Girl, what is she even doing here? I legit don't care. And her boyfriend, I have to guess, I don't know, and I really don't care. But to be fair, let's talk about a good character from Ryusei's route that I really did like. Rei. Rei's backstory is heavily tied to the plot, which is weird when you think about it when most of the characters aren't really tied that closely to the plot. Anyway, his entire family is a part of the DC side, and he'd enjoy them because of Elzum, his brother, letting his wife, who he also loved, die to an accident at the colony of Elpis. That name sounds familiar. Where the hell have I heard that before? Anyway, he kind of blames him for it, though it was a hard choice for him, and he does feel sadness for it. And his family, Kill gets on Rei's case for this because it's like he doesn't choose to understand the plight that he had. It was a nice part of the story, and I really enjoyed it. It also helps that he had a cool mech as well. Honestly, if Rei was the main character for this route, it would have been better for me. Not to say that Ryosei is a bad character, he's just generic for me because anyone can be the guy who's forced into the military life. Though this one does also add the gun to the head situation, so there's that. Which you're probably all wondering, why did they recruit him to begin with? Well, he's actually a bit of a psychic. They don't actually explain the deal with that. It's really weird. It just really ends up going nowhere. I mean, like, they tried to also do this kind of rivalry character with Tenzin, who kind of treats war like a game, which really ticks off Ryusei when these are people's lives. I know, ironic. And since we're talking about a game, let's actually talk about the gameplay now. Sorry it took too long. I know it took a while to get here, but hear me out. I have a good reason to do that. This game is a tactics game, but this one has big mech, which why the heck don't we have more mech games in general? I swear, games are weird. Anyway, this game's battles are really simple, since most missions can basically boil down to either destroy all enemies, or just a particular enemy, or get your units to a certain spot in a certain amount of turns. That's not much of an issue for me, but I know others can recognize it as a problem. Anyway, the hardest choice I usually had with this game was choosing which mech to use, since in some fights, you get a lot of good choices. For example, maybe you want a unit that's more speed oriented, and maybe want them to just get to the goal, or just reach some enemies that's further out there, while the slower ones can just deal with the front lines in general. Though sometimes you'll only ever want to use those good units since they are better than some units. Though sometimes you'll be given a very small pool to choose from, and sometimes you'll just need to use some bad units. Though for the most part you can ignore them generally. Although it's not that hard to actually upgrade them to become something decent, you're just putting way too much effort into making something viable rather than making them better. And upgrading is really like another hard decision that you really want to make because there are all a lot of good options. Maybe I want to upgrade the Ulstein this time, or maybe another mech. It's all really important, and I find it odd that the game would throw bad units in here to begin with. So you aren't stuck with these bad mechs, or the characters who have to pilot them. For example, I can actually make Gadia into another mech, though some characters like Bullet will need to stay in the Huckbind for plot reasons. I don't know why, but overall, you're better off spending more time than not upgrading the mechs, mostly so that you can survive more fights, though also upgrading your weapons is not a bad option either. They're both useful, though weapons overall, you can ignore most times than not, though not too often. Actually, there's a mode you can unlock that you can just deny upgrading, yeah. And you could actually totally beat the game like that, though I'm not gonna do that because, I'll talk about that in a moment. Though speaking of the mechs, let's talk about their individual stats, which there are 4 of them. You got 4 basic stats which govern your mech in battle, that being HP, energy, mobility, and armor. They pretty much do what they say, but they are also affected by the stats of the pilot, which is also important to consider what mech to put them in. Though then again, pilots will be forced out of their mechs by plot reasons sometimes. I mean, once you know when these moments will happen, it's like easy to subvert, but it's annoying to do. Though there are just mechs in the game that are just free to anyone to use, like the Windbraider, or however you're supposed to pronounce it, where I put Latoon in it, and she was actually very useful. Like, this mech could kill a man. It was devastating to most foes. Going back on the weapons now, mechs can carry 2 types of weapon, long range or short range. One aspect of the game that I really did enjoy was the customization of your weapons. Before every battle, you're allowed to take in more weapon, which is actually very useful for some fights when your main weapons do run out. So it's always a good backup weapon if you ever need it, though not always since I never did use them myself, but it's a good idea to have them there for some people. Another cool aspect is that you can actually upgrade these weapons to make them better, and hell, switching them around to weaker units can actually make them better, though only the pre-select weapons, not the ones that are stuck to one unit. That would have been kind of cool, but what can you do? Though, if you want to make especially sure that your units will survive, well, it's a good idea to work on their spirit, since it is by far the most useful mechanic in the game. Well, one of them. Spirits are basically commands that a character can do, like healing a character far away, or making sure they can land a hit on some foes, which can be dead useful in some fights, or making sure you can easily hit or dodge, which again, very dead useful, since dodging can really help a lot. It really does change the tide of battle. Well, actually, that's a bit of a lie, since it's more like a tsunami, and you're the tsunami. Because most fights are totally in your favor, and trust me, they are busted beyond belief. Basically, it's not about whether you're going to win, it's when are you going to win. Because fights will boil down to numbers, and you are more times than not always bigger unless some bullshit enemy like this guy who's on a healing spot, which you can do as well, but still. I could also mention the terrain, but that barely ever affects battles ever, maybe except in water, because you can use a beam weapon in water, but they'll be freaking useless. But that hardly matters since you're gonna be flying all the time, so it's like really not a risk. There is no real push. There is nothing to tell you, here's how to get better. And the only way to even get a reasonable challenge in here is the skill point system. See, every stage has a challenge to do. They can range from being to very easy to very hard. This is mostly due to sometimes asking you to do weird things. For example, defeat an enemy in a certain amount of turns, but also they will retreat after their health lowers to a certain number. Remember when I talked about Shu and you defeating him? Well, that is a challenge you can do. You don't actually have to do it, but it is a fun challenge to do nevertheless. There are the bog standard ones like defeat all enemies in a certain amount of turns, which are still doable, but still. You might wonder why you would want to do them. Well, because of two reasons. One, they're the only real challenge the game has. They also select the difficulty. Yeah, depending on how many you collected, it will actually determine what the game's difficulty is. I mean, that's an interesting way to make the game challenging. You have to do more challenging things to make it more challenging, but I would just rather it be just challenging already rather than me having to make it challenging. Because if I had to make it challenging, I think you kind of fail at really making it interesting to begin with. Granted, there is the no upgrading mech mode, but I feel that goes too far in the other direction of being too challenging for no good reason. And worse, takes away a mechanic away from you, thus meaning why are we even bothering? That's not to say that I didn't have fun with this game, it's just that you're just a train just passing through everything. Nothing's really gonna stop you. Hell, I haven't even mentioned more things that can break the game, like the rewards for doing those challenges. Basically, after every kill or every skill point gain, you gain pilot points. You can either put these points into stats, abilities, or even terrain stats, but I found that one to be useless without numbers since it really doesn't tell me what it actually affects. And more times than not, you're better off just spending the points on abilities since they are dead useful. For example, giving a unit potential means that they kinda gain a Zen boost that allows them to become stronger the lower the health is, which is useful for getting a fight done quickly. Though the best example of an ability that's just busted is SP regen. SPs are what your spirit uses, and that just basically breaks them in half, meaning you can use them constantly a little more often than you can. Thus, it really speeds up the process. Heck, you can even beat down a unit into whatever type of unit you want, like beating Bullet into a long-range unit, even though all of his skills somehow put him into a melee character for some reason. I don't know why they did this. Like, I know the sequel puts him in a melee unit, but not why here. And we have to finally talk about the final mechanic that was actually added in this version of the game, the join command. This mechanic basically shatters any difficulty left, since they basically make you into two units joined together with a sub-effect like being able to dodge more or more power to an attack of a certain type, which is always useful, with also the use of a second attack without having the ability to use one, which just really helps a lot more than you think. We're still not done. There's still the twin spirit command, which is basically a mechanic that it's basically a spirit command that can only be accessed when two characters are joined. Sometimes they can affect their own or both of them. A good example of how busted this mechanic can get is Excellence command that could just basically make both of their stats the best they could be, which just makes them very more powerful for their most powerful move, and it's really cool looking, might I add. Oh yeah, let's talk about the graphics now. It looks really nice. The battle animations are very good looking. They're done in the same style of the PSP game, which also looks good. Though I am confused on why on the tactics screens they use 3D models. They do look nice, though I personally would have been fine with portraits. Just saying. There are also 3D model things here sometimes, and I don't know why they're here. It really never made any sense to me. There is also the character portraits, and they are very nice and very expressive. It helps with the long cutscenes, though I wish they had some more major stuff voiced, since that could go a really long way, but that's just a hang-up if anything at this point. I want to stress again that I had a fun time at first until I had to redo it all. It's just that it could have been even more amazing. But anyway, let's get the story out of the way and just finish up this review. Now, you're probably all wondering, after so long, why did the evil-looking guy betray us? Well, I can explain that. He didn't. See, he was an arrogator the whole time, though not by choice. And in fact, everyone else who is an arrogator, yeah, none of them are there willingly, mostly. They are mind-controlled to be a part of them, like Tenzin and Aya's sister. Yeah, she's here. She's barely ever brought up. And I mean, like, on Kyosuke's route, she just dies, but on the Ryosei route, she lives. Yeah, that's important, just so you know. And god, that would have been annoying if I was like, who the heck is this character? Why are they even doing this? Well, their whole purpose of even doing this, like throwing the entire meteor at Earth, was for the sole purpose of just collecting samples and building their army. What for? Well, that's for some other time, but just know, sequel will handle that. That and also how this character kind of exists in this weird state. So, okay, he was actually the protag of the game Superhero Operation, which is basically kind of like Gilliam from Hirosenki. Ain't that right, Gilliam? Wait a moment, you're here? What are you doing here? Yeah, all those references in the games are actually kind of reference to Hirosenki. You know, the Elpis, the location of Hirosenki, and also the colony name that was hit with that poison gas. Yeah. It also helps with the Gespenst being the norm here when his original mech is a Gespenst. Actually, talking about the gameplay for one more moment, there are secrets in the game, like if you do a certain amount of kills at a certain amount of stages, you'll get a new mech, like Gilliam's mech, the Gespenst R, which is by far his most powerful weapon. Heck, remember when I talked about how Gespensts are weird like this, since I'm confused on the timelines? If the timeline is correct, it would mean that this universe, Gilliam would be the first Gespenst pilot, which you might think that, well, can't be the original one. But he is. Yeah, he's the only character in the Super Robot Wars franchise to be the same character throughout it. Well, except Misaki and Chu, but they're a weird case in and of themselves. And I'll talk about that in the sequel. I mean, like, did he help bind Zoldark with this stuff? I'm just a little confused is all I'm saying. I mean, like, that's my headcanon, but I would like a better answer, if anything. After quickly defeating Ingram, the evil-looking guy, who was not really doing this on his own choice, but kinda like had to. But anyway, after defeating him and Aya's sister, we finally defeat the Arrogators. Well, except the Arrogators had a backup. And this is only accessible if you get enough skill points for some baffling reason. But whatever. Essentially, the meteor they sent was not only a way to gain samples, but in case they are too strong, a basic nuke. Yeah. They quickly destroy it and the day is saved. For now, at least. Everyone goes their separate ways and waiting for the next Super Robot Wars.
At the end of the day, this game was pretty good. Sure, it still has its flaws, but the gameplay was still good, with its very own interesting concept, and the story was really, really good, and made me care a lot of the time with the music. Oh crap, I forgot about the music. Best way to describe the music? Go by the soundtrack. Next time, well, I'll try to get this thing done, but more likely than not, I might get this thing done. Yeah, modern review. Why did I toss this? This is thing I should have tossed.